Hi, this is Paula Gloria, and this show is called Farther Down the Rabbit Hole because we like to go into topics more deeply. You were just looking at the website of Karen Louise French, and she has just put a book out called Gateway to the Heavens. And since a byline that I like to use a lot is mantra and yantra equals tantra, this is a great opportunity to talk to Karen about how simple shapes mold reality and the fabric of your being. So Karen, thank you for joining me
Pleasure.
on this show. So I enjoyed listening to you talking to Alan about using shapes to create realities. What would you say is distinctive about this day and age? Because it seems as though the idea of yantras or the idea of manifestation has been esoteric in all the cultures, not just in the
absolutely.
West.
Oh, absolutely. And symbols and shapes are apparent in all the different belief systems across all the different cultures. Sadly, what's happened is people have just sort of latched onto one particular symbol and just revolve around that one single one. And
for example, you mean like
Christians
with
the cross and
Jews with the
exactly.
Star of David, or what's called the Sri Yantra.
Absolutely, and exactly, sun discs, sundial wheels, all these they're all representing concepts and ideas and numbers and different energies, and they're actually in all the different belief systems somewhere or another. It's just that one seems to be the one that people associate with and sort of link into. But all of those belief systems and all of humankind, if you go back in time, all stem from the same origins. And I'm going back tens of thousands of years to the point when we first drew shapes on petroglyphs on rock surfaces. And again, across
so
all...
you were studying the petroglyphs to see the symbols?
Yes, I looked at it. I didn't spend many years doing it, but I did look at the history of it all. And again, across all the cultures, there's striking similarities. And a recognition.
Well, when you say striking similarities, in a certain way, you only have so many basic shapes.
Exactly. And the fact that people across the globe became aware of those shapes, organising and orchestrating their lives, then actually drew them out consistently to represent the same things. Because the interesting thing about shapes is that you can't argue with them. They're essentially the same. You cut a square as a square as a square. It doesn't matter what culture you go in a circle likewise. Right. But the striking interest is that they represent the same concepts. They represent the same facet of reality, the same ideas.
In other words, it's not a matter of belief.
It's not a matter of... That's the beauty of sacred geometry. If you're... there's a very logical side to sacred geometry, a very mathematical side to it, which is all about rules and things like that. But geometry also has a very esoteric spiritual side to it, which is where sacred geometry comes into place, because sacred geometry is all about recognizing those rules and the energies of those shapes, but then applying them with belief, with intent, to harness those energies. If you only use geometry for its very physical side, very logical side, then it's purely functional.
You call it mundane.
Yeah, mundane. You're making a chair or a table. Or the interesting thing is you're using the table, the square, in the same way as a person who uses it for sacred purposes, i.e. because it relates to space and the organisation of space, but you're not doing it deliberately because you want to make that a sacred area or invoke the energy or work with the energy in any way.
I once heard that the definition of ritual is you're doing some activity that doesn't seem to have a practical purpose. But maybe if you understood the science of what that ritual is about, it might actually be more practical. So maybe what looks sacred at one level is almost mundane at another level.
Yes, and the same is true for the definition of sacred geometry. I like to say that if you're doing it with intent for sacred purposes, then it's sacred geometry. However, everything is essentially sacred. So even something that's mundane is actually a sacred practice, because everything we're doing is part of the Gloria. So,
right.
You know what I mean? So
there was some Sufi saint, and they were complaining because he had his feet up pointing towards the Holy of Holy in the temples. And they said, oh, you're pointing your feet to God? And he goes, well, show me where I can point them, where
exactly.
God isn't.
Exactly. I once had somebody looking at my stand and said to me, you've got your Tai Chi, the yin-yang symbol, upside down. It was on it or on its side. You shouldn't have that. And I said, well, now it's the right way up. But there isn't.
Right.
You know, it's relative, isn't it? It's not really. It's all just a different way of recognizing that.
And then you see some people who seem to be having mundane activities, and they go about it in a sacred way. So if they're just a carpenter building a table, you might find it's a beautiful atmosphere because it's a soul that's so in tune with what
there we
he's
go.
doing.
But you've hit on it there, because they're doing it with love. There's still intent in it.
A peaceful soul.
Because they're coming from a space where they're actually lost in their act, lost in what they're doing. They're creating something, and if you were to be making something and you were just throwing it together like in a factory, it's not quite.
Right.
It is the intent is still the key, because if you're not enjoying it and you're
right.
You know.
I noticed you were talking with Alan maybe while the cameras were rolling, or maybe even before, about how we seem to be moving away from the earthly dimension more into abstraction. Or I was thinking, this is my little offering, that if you look on creation is made up of 5 elements, possibly 4 if you want to take away ether, that it's really a balance, so that right now the internet seems very much the air element, and yet it seems as though the most successful work on the internet is grounded with people who present themselves, or a physical location. The simplest things can be very attractive, instead of very complicated animations. And apparently when Edison, or when film first came into being, you know what people were fascinated with? They would take down, and this is expensive, right? Because the cameras are rolling so many frames per second. They would videotape waves, and people would flock to the film houses to watch these kinds of things. They were interested in nature. They wanted to see nature through the eyes of technology.
And you could apply that in all sorts of things. There's good aspects to it and negative, because things like Second Life, people getting so absorbed by the technology that they're not actually living their world, this world.
Right.
They get sucked into a virtual world,
right,
that then they can't detach themselves from.
So, but your point with Alan was that the symbols are helping us move away towards the concrete or the earthly.
Symbols have always been around us, and it doesn't matter in what way you use them, whether you use them in literature, in art, if you're using them in a mathematical formula. Symbols are so different from signs because symbols are actually representing reality, and they resonate with us at a soul level.
Symbols are different than signs.
Yes, because a sign is an instruction. Go left, go right. Whereas a symbol, something like a cross or a triangle, when we look at that, we know it means something. It means something to us, and it actually resonates with us, just like your yantras. They're actually they're almost like tools that link into us energetically, and there's something that happens as a result of that. And then obviously we can actually build things. We can use them as tools, because symbols have this feature to them.
Let me see if I can go to something I can, because this is very abstract. When I was in front of the Sphinx in Egypt, and I would look at it, it felt like I knew something. It was just beyond my fingertips. And then I had this feeling that as I sat there looking at it, gazing at it, standing looking at it, that probably so many other human beings before me had done the same, looking at it and just about grasping something. You feel like you just about get what it is. And surely if you go back far enough, somebody who created it must have known they got it because they created it. And part of creating something and then offering it is you want it to be recognized.
That's a very interesting idea.
You're making like a connection through the time. So that, to me, is the importance of architecture, because you were saying to Alan that temples are not so important anymore.
Oh, okay, right. Let's put it, we're all evolving, and the universe is evolving, okay? And my view is that all of energy, all of things manifest, all physical things, if you like, all of matter, material things originated from the original dot and expanding. And if you look at the variety of flora and fauna, you know, thousands of butterflies, worms, and everything's combining in different things. We're creating things as well. We make cars, we make buildings, so we're acting in the same capacity, making things, building things, and we tend to rely on those things as tools to facilitate us to learn, to connect with ourselves, or
so we learn from what we create.
Yeah, just like the internet, as you're saying, because we use it as a vehicle to expand our knowledge by reading what other people are doing or by communicating people. They're all vehicles for us to participate in reality, to learn, to find out things, to expand our horizons. What I think is going to be the case is at some point.
Well, in that case, the symbol or what we've created unifies. It brings other people.
It does.
So
and that learning process seems that the creating of physical things is sort of like accelerating as well. You know, we're making so many, making more and more things, and things are getting more and more complicated. Just like temples started off very simple, and they've got more and more complicated. And
but are we making more and more things? Because a lot of people, their lives just are on the internet. They're not making. We're losing manufacturing jobs. And is that what you meant by the progression?
Well, what's interesting is that people complicate their lives. They have a lot of things, and they think, oh God, I don't need this. I want the simple life again. I want to get back to what really counts, because we complicate our lives. And that's what's happened to sacred geometry. It's got really complicated. Temple designs have got really complicated with this and that. And
what do you mean temple designs? People are building temples nowadays?
Yeah. Well, yes. No, if you look at the history, like a cathedral, there's sacred geometry built into every facet of the archways, the windows, the nave, as opposed to a simple stone circle. You know, the complexity, the amount of geometry, the geometric shapes. And if you look back at the petroglyphs, they were very simple: circles, spirals, squares. Then more and more complicated shapes happened over the generations. Things like the pentagram were discovered, were drawn, were used.
One wonders how much of that is conscious and how much of it just develops. For example, when I get up in the morning and look at the sunrise, it's so nice to have a straight shot at the sun coming over the East River, that if I was to build a house, I'd want to make sure I wouldn't build it behind somebody else who would obstruct my view. So you could see how entire cities could organize around one simple principle, like the sun coming up.
Yep.
And it looks to be very complex, but it was just human beings wanting to have a straight shot at the sun.
That's very true.
So were they conscious of it, or were they just following the patterns of nature?
Well, I don't know. I think to a certain extent, this is quite complicated because a number of different things have happened. Is that large numbers of people have lost sight of the sunset because of other things coming up, because the cars have become more important to them, and have lost sight of the simple things.
You mean taking time to enjoy a sunset?
Time taking things to enjoy. The square, circle, and triangle, very, very simple shapes. But how many people actually think about them and what they mean?
Well, yantras are a meditation device, just
absolutely.
Like a mantra. So you're meaning they're not taking time to contemplate a shape?
They're not taking time to even think about the fact that there is a shape. They don't even take time to think about the fact that we draw a circle intuitively. You know, that the circle exists.
Talk about the circle like you did with Alan, the dot in the circle.
Okay, right. If you regard reality, there's things like time and the space and being and essence and all these. This is very much touches on your point about complexity and simplicity, actually, because those ideas are incredibly complicated. Time, for example, how does time work? What is time? How do you bound it? Does it have an edge? What is eternity? What is the moment? And, you know, scientists spend hours creating incredibly complicated equations describing what that means, you know, the detail of it and how it works and the mechanics. And yet, all of that is summed up by the circle. All of that complexity is there within a circle. That energy, what it means, what it represents, because a circle is, just by drawing a circle, you're drawing eternity. It goes on. There's no beginning, there's no end. A circle can be this big, it can be infinitely small, which is a dot, which is the moment, which has no bounds, which is here, it's present now, it's moved on.
A dot.
Yeah.
A point.
A point. How big is a point? How big is the moment? in time, all of time, and then you have the infinitely large circle that is unbounded, and across all cultures that was used to represent that unbounded boundlessness, eternal time. And interestingly, the idea of zero, which humans came up, is represented by that circle, because the zero says, here is nothing, but it has the potential to become everything.
In Roman numerals, there wasn't a zero.
No, exactly. I mean, and two cultures came up. The Indians are credited with it, but also in South America, they came up with this idea, and it's a very complicated idea, the idea of zero. Because as soon as you put the dot in the middle of the zero, you have the number one. And that
at the dot in the middle of the zero, I don't see how's that number one.
Okay, well maybe I'll go back to the zero, because the zero is consciousness unmanifest. It has the condition to be everything, but it isn't anything. So it's like the Taoists call it Wu Chi. It's sort of nothingness, if you like, and they represent that as the circle with nothing. What is the number one? It is something in isolation. It has no duality. It just is. It is a single thing, but it is a thing, whereas a circle is nothing. So when you have the number one also represents a number of things, because it's a symbol. It's not just a number. It represents the idea of unity, of the point, of I, which is also the same shape as the number one, right? It is a stick. It's vertical. And again, this is also representative of something very important, because the circle, being a sphere or a circle, goes around this one. Okay, and as soon as you have that, that's the moment. Time now has a moment, now has one, now has the point. So time, the circle starts to turn around this here. And that's where the idea of the wheel, and why the wheel is used so much, because it acts like an axle around which time can turn.
So when you look at it two-dimensionally, the yantra would be a circle with a dot in the middle.
Exactly,
right? That's
two-dimensional. And you've hit an exact point. When we create a picture, it's a two-dimensional representing a multidimensional reality. We're conveying an emotion, we're capturing a moment in time. And that's what these are all about. These are structures of reality that you connect in with to understand reality in a way. Because by looking at the circle, you can look at time, and what does time mean, and what does time represent, and what does time give us? It gives us the ability to have an event in which something can happen. There's cause and effect, where something else can happen as a result of it, and the wheel can turn. And the further you are away from that dot in the middle, the more distant it is, the more you're at the mercy of events, the more you can't see that moment for what it is. The fact that that's all there actually is.
So you're creating illusion that there's something other than that moment.
That there's lots of moments, and you're stuck in them.
The farther away you are, there's probably more opportunity for a whole lot of illusion.
Absolutely.
But that's also a whole lot of what life is.
But we all strive, absolutely, but we all strive, we're drawn back to that dot, because that's where we all come from. So you have the zero, and you have the one. Now all those realities that we create on computers that a lot of people get sucked into are created out of zeros and ones. And all the numbers that make up our universe are similarly created out of zeros and ones. 2 is a 1 plus a 1. 3 is 1, 1, 1. 4 is 1 plus 1 plus 1. Now the interesting thing is you have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 is a 1 with a 0. As soon as you put the 0 on the other side of the 1, you have 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Now the circle represents everything that can possibly become, because it represents infinite number of things. So where's
every zero you take a magnitude?
Now you put
10 to 100
absolutely.
to 1,000.
0 after the 1 means everything. Nothing, everything. 1 in the middle. All the other numbers are made out of that 0 and 1. That's all there really is 0, 1, 0. Nothing else. The other numbers are combinations that create shapes that allow us to inhabit space and time and what it is to be, and to create bodies. They're like the coat hangers out of which we can manifest a reality, to live within it, to experience experiences. Because if we didn't have the number 2, two is so fundamental because there would be no...
Oops, sorry.
It's okay. If we didn't have the number two, there would be no you and me looking at each other. I'm actively looking at you're a passive reflection. You're actively looking at me. Love, hate, up, down, in, out, male, female. Getting back to that one at the beginning, there wouldn't be any duality. There wouldn't be any interest there. But we want to get back to that because that's where we come from. We come from that one. We'll stem back to it, and we originate from it, and we are part of it. All of us.
Is this an intellectual or an emotional experience for you as you study this?
For me, it's been a very, very interesting journey because I started out with art, went into the intellectual side, mathematics, business things, writing books, research, but I've been drawn into the spiritual side as a result because it kept cropping up, and then I started having a lot of those sort of experiences coming to me.
What kind of experiences?
Insights and things, you know, that couldn't have come from anywhere else other than somewhere else because I'd never had those thoughts or never read about it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So where did those insights come from that allowed me to see how this all fitted together and what it meant? But now I'm going like a full circle back into my art, and that has become an emotional experience because my art originally used to be very, very detailed, an exact replication of whatever it was I saw, and people go, that's amazing, wow, it looks just like an apple. Now my art is all abstract, and I used to be very disparaging about abstract art because I thought it was just somebody being lazy. And now I can see now nothing has any form to it, and most of my art now I have a general idea of what it's going to be, and I know what's going into it, but it's almost like that just intent, and a lot of it's channeled. I'm sort of more of a vehicle, but the emotional response I get to my art now is amazing. People absolutely love a picture or they hate it. I had one woman wanted to say, I want to cut up every one of your copies of that picture. I can't stand it. Next woman comes along and wants it 6 by 6, you know.
Right, so you know that you're striking at something because
exactly.
You're getting a reaction and energy is moving.
Exactly, and that is a very good example of how geometry pictures everything about reality, the existence of reality, and our pictures are just two-dimensional representations of that reality. They have an energy. If a picture can have an energy, then a simple shape has an energy, and it's all about the intent behind it and people resonating with it intuitively or consciously, you know. And sometimes some people need to be reminded of that. They need to be shown it. They need to be explaining for that button to be turned back on again.
Speaking of the button going back on, Alan had asked you that if you were in a better environment, would you be more likely to have a good intention? And you said you'd have to think about that. Because I think about this very often. I think that when you come into the world, it seems you come into the world with a certain history from your parents, your grandparents, and there's certain proclivities and potentials that you can do with the gifts that you've been given to have a body, at least insofar as you know with this limitation of the awareness. I'm not talking about the soul that could see all of your incarnations. And you wonder how much it seems like you have to draw upon your resources. You can't pretend that you have resources that you don't have. So my understanding of that question that Alan asked is, if you're in a nice shape, will your intention reflect that nice shape? Or does maybe a dismal situation force you to go inward, to go to a deeper level of intention and sort of, whereas somebody that has everything just so easy, they're not even inclined or inspired or challenged to call upon the intention?
That's an interesting one, because you can get into generalizations, because I know very wealthy people are also very spiritual, and I know wealthy people who are absolutely awful, and then I know very poor people who, in appalling circumstances, who are incredibly spiritual, and other ones that are miserable and can't see their way out of it.
I agree. So there we have a square. We've got 4 types.
Exactly. So that is so much dependent upon the individual and in the motivations and the lessons, and also whether or not, because I see it with my own children, when you suddenly make that point, when you suddenly recognise you are here and you do have some gifts, and you think, why am I here? What am I to do? What am I meant to be doing? Why am I in this? And then you start to think about things in a completely different point of view, because it doesn't matter what your circumstances are. You're there to do something, and some people will put themselves into miserable circumstances because they've recognised what their true role is, and it doesn't necessarily revolve around being in a nice house and having money. Mm-hmm. And they might put themselves into some incredibly dangerous situations or whatever because they recognise that. So it's a matter of recognising who you are and what you have, and whether it's just one set, and it might be to nurture a particular child because that child is relevant or important. It might not necessarily be to come up with some theory on quantum physics, you know.
But what would be the gateway to heaven? You could have a gateway to heaven no matter what you're doing on a mundane level, raising a child, or you know, doing quantum mechanics or brain surgery.
Because as you said earlier on, it's the love of what you're doing. Is whatever it is that you're doing, and enjoying that.
But how do you inspire love? I think the idea of sacred geometry and beautiful spaces, nice temples, or maybe hotel lobbies, whatever your culture happens to have available, the idea is to uplift. Like, you haven't been to the public access studios yet on 59th. The first time Alan Steinfeld took me in there, I had the feeling like I was going into a cathedral. Mm. You know, it just really deeply moved and inspired me.
Well,
whereas
you're
other
absolutely
people
right.
can pick up, you know, the tension because you're trying to get shows done and you have X amount of time, and you know, soundboards aren't working and things like that. But that first hit, and that's all technology. I don't think it's laid out like some Masonic whatever. It was laid out in a mundane way to do television.
Oh. Well, it's interestingly, because if it's to do television, then there will have been some proportions and things put in there.
Well, yeah, to have the lights a certain distance.
Distances and things like that, yeah. But it does touch upon another interesting point, is that what's sacred and works for one person won't necessarily work for another, because I've been to places and people gone, oh, the energy here, and I'm going, okay, well, I can't feel anything, you know.
Right.
But
speaking of energy, we'll talk about this crop circles.
Oh, okay.
What you feel on that.
Because
from public access studios to crop circles.
But it is interesting because feng shui is becoming more popular.
Right.
And the energy of space is important because it does make you feel, alter your mood and what you're sitting on, how you're sitting, and all this type of thing. And you can take that. You can take things like feng shui to quite an extreme in terms of making sure nothing has edges on it, and the way the table's laid out and who sits at the table at a particular point. And you can.
Because I've been studying psychosis and neurosis.
Exactly. But this goes all the way back to the very, 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 very beginning of this interview, which was about getting less involved in the physical things, because
to be free.
As we're getting more spiritual, as we link into more to our intuitive abilities and our abilities to manifest reality, because by being in reality we're manifesting, by looking we're manifesting it, okay? As we understand that better, as we learn about that, and it takes practice, so you know, that can be a long time for some people, or it can be instantaneous, and sometimes you have to have do rituals or whatever to learn what that means. But as you learn it,
to not take the moment for granted.
Exactly. As you learn it and you learn how you are manifesting reality by being in it, you can call in that energy as you need it. You can create your sacred space immediately around you, within you.
Because you've sort of built up a reservoir.
Because you've built of it. Absolutely. Just like some of these monks can build up their body temperature and make their clothes steam, because they understand at a very deep level how their body is linked into how they work energetically within the universe. And it's not about having a heater or a radiator, because do you see what I mean? What I'm getting at?
So do you build up intention, or because sometimes I think artists are sort of, they kind of not really abhor, but they don't really. There are a lot of artists that would consider sacred geometry sort of a silly New Age thing, that it's a little bit too much overthinking, and that you lose spontaneity. So would the most powerful intention be something that is a result of study and hard work, or the result of sort of letting go and tuning in? And
ooh, well, that's about learning, isn't it? Because to become a really gifted, talented artist, you have to learn. Right. You have to go through it.
get the techniques down.
Mantras and yantras they take years. You know, there's a lot of learning and discipline, because it's one of those weird situations where the letting go can only happen after you understand what you're doing.
Right.
And
can
it's
we
really
come
difficult.
in on this? Maybe. Oh, Alan?
He's gone to sleep. I'm very
but
interested.
This is an artist's interpretation, and I knew this artist at the ashram, and she was very much a free spirit. And at this ashram, this young Swami wanted to teach the esoteric sciences. He said it was about the Divine Mother and the 5 elements, and he said the gurus that have come to the West are not teaching what it was that they went through to acquire their stature.
Exactly. Yeah.
So he was giving out secret mantras and things, and yantras, and I would come into the room once when he had some complicated structure up there, and I just had this grip in my stomach, going, he shouldn't be doing this. Now, I don't know about yantras. How could I get this thought that he shouldn't be giving out these secrets? And at other times, almost becoming so sick, I'd want to fall to the ground. So I know that these shapes are very powerful. Now, this particular elaboration of the Sri Yantra, which we would know in the West as the Star of David, he had set it up very, kind of in an expanded way, and then this is where he put some mantras to it. And I think Alan got this picture when he came out to Denver after a very traumatic time with the government in India, who can be really, really annoying, because they kind of there always seems to be the struggle between the saints and the politicians, and sometimes there's a thin line. You can have some very saintly people that really sacrifice themselves to the service of people, and you can have some people who put on the garb of being saints, but they aren't really.
They're not really walking the talk, are they? Yeah.
Yeah. So you. But I'm just curious if you have any thoughts, because you were saying, if I'm not mistaken, and it's on the cover of your book, the Sri Yantra here, or the Star of David.
That's a very simplified version of the Sri Yantra.
Why don't you talk about your book cover first,
okay,
and then we'll move on to the...
Because my research, basically, I was looking at how these shapes represent reality, so the square, the circle, triangle, and I put that combination together, and I thought, oh, this sums it all up. This is what it's all about. This is the logo, this is the brand, this is the, got into that mindset. And then the following week, I was researching mandalas, yantras, mantras, all of that type of things, and came across the Sri Yantra, read about it, and I thought, and it's exactly the same principles behind it, exactly the same basic elements, though mine is greatly simplified in terms of what it looks like, and has no frills or colour or anything.
This is where the divine is supposed to live in,
exactly.
These holy shapes. And the Sri Yantra usually is for Lakshmi, or prosperity.
Yeah.
Or how did you...
Well, the Sri Yantra is also known as the mother diagram. It's the very first one, out of which all the other ones are like siblings, if you like. It is the one that can be used for anything, because basically yantras are almost, you can equate them to sort of Western occult sort of magic. They can put together different ones to invoke different things. So if you want to get rich or whatever, it's a bit like a here we are, here's your magic formula for you to meditate on that, or so.
And in India, parts of the Vedas are a lot of invocations. Some parts, and then they have whole castes, because they don't want that just to be not frittered away, but that if you learned it from your father, who learned it from his father, it's handed down, and you have your initiations, that you approach it in a way of service to society, instead of you're pissed off with someone and you do a yantra to kind of screw them up.
Exactly.
That has that really low understanding that makes people recoil and not want anything to do. I mean, I even realized somebody described to me what voodoo was. And this was someone who was healing people purportedly with AIDS. I mean, that's a whole nother discussion about what AIDS really is, but certainly people were suffering in Africa, and this was an African man who was actually, I believe, a doctor, but he found that he had the greatest ability to heal when he went back to his nature-based understanding. And when she described what voodoo was, I go, my goodness, that's what I was studying in India. It's the 5 elements. But we think voodoo, you know, and you've got this bad vibe about it.
Well, there we go, the bad vibe. Everything to do with symbols, particularly if they're based using geometric shapes or anything, can be used for positive intent and it can be used for negative intent. And because they each have their shadow self, so you can use.
But I don't even know if it's the intent. I remember Krishnamurti said, is if you put on a symbol, somebody's going to hate you. And I never quite understood it because I never understood the power of yantras.
Yeah.
But, you know, when I was flipping through this, when Alan first put it, as I do with all yantra books, I flip through and I say, is there a swastika here? Because
yes, there is.
It just seems as though it's
yes,
just...
there is.
I found it. But that it's incomplete. I've seen, all of the religions should get along, you know, coexist. There's a bumper sticker. And meticulously missing is the swastika. So I thought, how complete can a society be, for whatever reason, that we can't have at our disposal the totality of the shapes?
But this is what I'm saying. A lot of the religions tend to focus on just a few and ignore the others.
Well,
it's sort of,
it's
just an exclusion.
Grow up around only one.
Exactly.
They get identified.
But they all go back to the same basic few, and then it's sort of. And this is the shame, because you say, it doesn't matter what you put on you, somebody will dislike it.
That's what Krishnamurti said. As soon as you wear a symbol, somebody's going to hate you, is what he said.
But it's the association of what that represents. Just like the swastika now represents a period in history. People don't look at it from the point of view of just its logical aspect. Let's just take that first of all. Right. What does it logically represent of reality? Take away all the emotional side of it, take away the... You know, just like a square is space. There's no emotion attached to that idea whatsoever. And similarly...
A square never seems to piss anyone off.
No, exactly. Nor does a circle, really. If you just look at it as a shape and take away anything that's coloured it, anything that's where it's been used for negative or positive attention, just like a cross. Just look at a cross for a cross, and what does a cross represent? Not without any of the... anything like
there's
that.
Always a tension about a cross, though, don't you think? Just
attention.
Attention about the cross. Tension.
Tension. Well, it is. It's 4 opposing forces. It's being pulled, because the cross is within the circle and within the square, and the cross is what is X marks the spot. It shows you where the middle of all the shapes are. So when it's in a square and a circle like this,
where would the cross?
The cross is, well, there's different. Again, the word cross means a lot of different things to different people. It's the cross here, which you enter sacred space through a doorway. So it shows you where the middle is, the middle of all the shapes. There's also there's the cross that goes across like this, which gives you all the direct. So those 2 crosses give you the directions, north, south, east, west, and all the rest of in between. Then there's obviously the Latin cross, which is the one with the longer arm, which is a simplified representation of the cube unfolded, and has become associated with suffering.
Why is that?
Because of its Christ on the cross, suffering, crucifixion.
But do you think in another culture that you'd have that same symbol where Jesus Christ wasn't around, and it would still come up with that?
Well, the interesting thing is, if you look at the representations of the cross, the oldest representations of the cross, across again all the globe, were just very simple. The one without the elongated one.
Equidistant.
And even the Latin cross has a similar meaning. It's just some of the better aspects of it have been taken away, because it's about learning through your experiences, basically. And some of those will be good and some will be bad. And at any point here, you can choose. You have the choice in here, whether you go left, whether you go right, whether you go up and down, as part of your learning. And it's about choice.
You know, even if you had the elongated cross, if you put it into motion, which is the swastika, the Theosophists talked about the fiery cross, that it's a cross and the flames are coming off. It's spinning, and you can see the direction it's spinning according to which way the flames are going.
Yeah.
And there's so much controversy about which
way it should go.
Yes, yes. But even if one was elongated, just the momentum of spinning would make it even.
And also, yes, you'd have a circle within a circle, because the longer one would be sitting around here, creating a fire trail, and the one there would be creating an inner circle.
Why do you think the swastika, because you often see it in India with dots in between, have you thought about that?
Yes, I did remember.
Because in most temples in
represent?
India, you'll see a Sri Yantra, and then you'll also see a swastika. But the swastika always has little dots in between.
I think I might have written about that actually.
You'd have
Put them.
something
I
in
don't
there.
know if did I put it in there. I used to know that. Sorry,
That's okay.
dredging my memory
That's okay.
cells here. I can't remember.
The reason I was attracted to ask you that question was in Alan's interview. You were talking about the dot within the circle, and I thought the swastika having the flames coming off, the fiery cross, which interestingly enough, that movement reminds me of King Solomon's ring that said, "This too shall pass." That if you're sitting high and everything's going well, just remember that will pass. And if things are miserable, that will pass too. But the important thing is to go
always
through
moving.
all the transitions to, I guess.
Well, otherwise you don't learn, do you?
What's that?
You don't learn. If everything's, if we lived for eternity as human beings, it's almost like, well, what's the point? Because you could do everything experienced, you'd actually get lazy. It would be like, oh, I've done that. There wouldn't be any meaning. It's like there's a beginning and an end. So transitions and phases and extremes are necessary. It doesn't mean that there's even extremely unpleasant things, you know. It's not that I want to will it on anybody or say, oh, well, you're just going through that horrible experience because you wanted or whatever, you know, which is, you know. But without the good, you can't have the bad.
Yeah. And
if things are always nice for an awfully long time, it's just like my children. They have no idea what it is like to be without something, to be starving and hungry. You know, they don't appreciate it when you have it.
That?
Well, I have known scraping together my pennies because I've run out of money.
Because you've been an artist.
Well, no, just my first job wasn't paid very much, and had lived in a rat-infested house and didn't have very much money, and I was too proud to ask my parents' help, and you know, I was on my own and independent.
So when you got this inspiration from inside, you kept moving forward because this is pretty. It's esoteric knowledge. It seems why at a time when you've got to cover your rent and do all these practical
Oh right,
stuff.
no, this is I started this way later, but it is still a very similar idea because.
But there's still going to be impressions. I mean, because I'm studying modern psychoanalysis now, and if you've had experiences of deprivation in your very early childhood, very, very early,
well,
then later on, if you have a feast, it's not going to affect that pattern. But I keep wondering, you know, how can you work with those patterns? Because not everybody's going to get the breast that they want when they want it.
Absolutely. Yeah, no.
Yeah. But anyway, so when you were talking about the dot in the circle, and I was thinking about the dots that you see in the swastika, there's something that's boxy, right? It's crosses, and then you can sort of be informed that, you know, the arms are fire. Then you've got a dynamic.
That it's moving.
A dynamic symbol, as opposed to the Sri Yantra, which roughly, I always heard that the downward triangle was representing the male and the upward was the female. But
that one's moving together.
Do you think maybe that's been? Well, what comes to mind when you look at this? I'm just curious.
There's quite a lot to me. There's a lot of dynamics in this one.
Yeah,
because they're moving. They're moving. You know, you've got these here coming in. This is just my feeling of it. There's radiating out here. Now, obviously, the male is much bigger in this one than the female principle. But I get a sense of this forming, coming in, moving in, and these are very interesting.
I'm sure this is the artist's interpretation.
Particularly since there's a bigger one here. It's almost like this, and it's also all over the heart chakra. Mini bubbles coming out from it. It's like sending out that energy. Because quite bizarrely, I did a meditation this morning which involved bubbles of light coming out of my heart chakra. So when I saw this, I was like, this is very interesting. So.
Oh, you know what? This in India, Lakshmi, you usually see coins coming out of her hands. So probably
it could be coming out of
this is an artist's idea of maybe manifestation, sort of like poof. Like sometimes if you're around these masters and vibhuti is happening, it's exploding everywhere.
But manifestation, true manifestation that's meant for you, will be linked into the heart chakra. If it's meant for you. And this is what it goes back into this intent, you know, wanting something, as opposed to it being needed or wanted. You know, with this my book, I've really it was all as a result of my third child coming along, because I suddenly couldn't manage my career as I was in the corporate life, long hours, etc. And she was a catalyst for this, because I'd had the ideas and been doing some work on it. I thought, right, I'm going to do this because I can do it at home. It's challenging. It's the sort of thing I enjoy, and never looked back. And this is, gosh, she's 11 now, so 11 years ago, nearly 12 years ago, and I have never gone back to what I'd call my old career.
So you left corporate life, and you published this book, and you go on tours, and you help people? In
the last 2 years, yes, and I've never been more fulfilled now than when I was in the corporate life earning, you know, extremely good money. And now the money comes as we need it, always exactly the right amount, never more, never less, you know. We don't have fancy holidays or things like that, but we're very happy as a family.
Right.
And we have a much simpler life. We don't want for anything in particular, you know, we have sufficient.
So this was balancing your own life?
Yes, but it was balancing, it's not just my life, my family's life as well, but quite bizarrely as a result.
The mother and the wife.
Yeah, exactly. And I know exactly what I'm meant to be doing now, you know, it's very clear, whereas before it wasn't necessarily so clear. It was a corporate ladder and all the rest of it. It's taken me a lot longer than I thought, but it's been very rewarding.
Do you think as a woman it just feels better to be doing this type of spiritual, artistic, although I do know you're talking about mathematics too, and you have a logical, practical side, but is it more, do you feel in your part of the family that somehow being a woman, your femininity is bringing in what's often very absent when the mother and the wife is climbing the corporate ladder?
I don't know, because it's taken me away from home now, so quite a bit. But at the right time now, the children are that much more independent. No, I think if a mother's happy, because I know if I'm tired and unhappy, it immediately affects everybody else within the family. If the mother's happy, then it affects the whole family. But as a mother, it's also being aware of, you know, what your children need and how what your role within the family and how they are nurtured and developed. Because, you know, you can get mothers who are home and awful. It's just like our conversation before. You can have mothers who are at home all the time and awful mothers.
Right.
So, but I'm very, very happy, and my children, you know, see me fulfilling a dream and something but I've had to work very hard at it, and I'm there, but I am there for them if they need me, but sometimes I'm not, and they have to learn.
Actually, though, I would imagine you could have corporate executives in your seminars who would use this knowledge as a meditation device, and they would be more fulfilled in their corporate position.
Well, not just that, it also puts into perspective, you know, a lot of them I know now use it when there's, because if you're all sat around a square table, what you're doing is you're taking different positions, and it's very difficult to get consensus. It's better to work round tables, but somebody has to be the chairperson, because otherwise it goes round and round and round and round. But everybody's equal in that position. And also I used to use it all the time without realising when I wrote articles. I used to write quite a bit about models, business models that you could use and strategies. And I would use geometric shapes within those to organise the information. And quite bizarrely, when I look back at it, I was using the right type of shape for the type of information that was being used. I'll give you an example. There's a model called, it's not my model, but Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is a psychological model, which is triangular. And it's all about reaching self-actualization, and it's very similar to where all the chakras are and what you're fulfilling.
The triangle usually means as you're going towards that self-actualization, you're walking a finer and finer line.
It's a concentration of energy, absolutely. And also the energy is getting more and more concentrated. You have to work through an awful lot. It gets harder, actually, more work involved as you go up. Because it's very easy to just sludge around and just be and not really motivate yourself.
Except it seems as though as you're ascending self-actualization, even though it's harder, your joy comes from your soul
level. Yeah, exactly.
Pulling you along.
And also you might not necessarily need as much as you perceive. When you're down here, you think you need a lot.
Right.
And actually you start to think, well, I don't actually need. Do I need all those things? You know, no, you know, it's really quite interesting. But that's just an example. Circular models, which were all about energy radiating out from a central point, like in marketing. You know, you've got the customer in the middle and all these things that are, you know, things like that. So, and also in modelling various pieces of software and the way the information flowed, it was quite striking. So
Are
it's
you
all.
a software person? Did you
No, I'm
design
not, but I
software?
used to
But
work
you
with
used to work
software
them?
engineers.
What was your position in corporations?
Well, I tended to be what's in the sort of function where it's to do with marketing and product management. So I was a bit like a spider in the middle of a web. I'd have to talk to engineers, and I'd have to be dealing with very creative people. And
so it's kind of a metaphor.
well, it's very
word.
exactly, yes, exactly.
Really?
So all my past experiences have been an integral part of where I'm at now. Though at the time I didn't recognise it because I wasn't particularly happy in that world, or I wasn't fulfilled in the way that I was.
A lot of people kind of dump all the problems on corporations, but it seems just how I was talking about how towns or cities can be built just by getting a good shot at the sunrise, and that it just sort of, the buildings will grow that way. It seems the same could be said also about corporations, providing you have courageous people who aren't outright committing fraud. And that's why the idea of a caste system, or somebody who, like someone told me, I think it was Eric Barret, who was talking to me and Alan about Tantra in traditional cultures. He said, the higher the caste, the less the freedom. Everyone has this idea that, oh, if I'm a high caste, I have more freedom. But we're not talking about just a lot of money, because if that's the only thing, then people will strive after it by any means possible. And then after you have that money, you have the accumulation of how you strove after it. So whether others know it overtly or they don't, when society starts to fall apart as a result of not enough nobility and sacrifice, hard work on the part of those who have the ability, who were gifted, turning that ability and gift back to society, then people start to not respect wealth so much. They think, wow, those guys maybe were thieves. Maybe they stole it. Maybe that's why and so then they'll, rightly so, blame their leaders. But then if you don't even know who the leaders are,
it's the same with inherited wealth. What have you done to earn it?
I think, though, with inherited wealth, you chose your parents, so
that's true.
You do have the energy of that money. But basically, I don't think there's enough wisdom given to people about these subtler vibrations, about the charge and the karma of power.
No, absolutely. No, money is another energy in its own right. You can use it for good.
How do you see money in sacred geometry?
Well, I haven't gone into it specifically, but it's very.
I'm sure you must have.
No, well, yes. Well, it's very interesting because somebody pointed out to me that a credit card, the ratio of the side to the width to the breadth, is a ratio that of old is to do with wealth.
Oh, really?
Yeah, accumulation to do with wealth. But now, when you think about it, every time you use a credit
Who's
card,
accumulating it though?
Exactly. Every time you're using a credit card, what you're actually creating is debt. Sort of opposite of
well,
wealth.
I guess wealth for someone might be debt.
Yeah,
for
exactly,
someone else.
exactly. So, but absolutely, there's always opposites, and also what you use your money for has an energetic effect.
But that's kind of a zero-sum game. I get the feeling that sacred geometry, that if you can really unlock the power of the yantras, you can tap into that infinite abundance. And maybe since we're on our last 5 minutes, you might use it however you want to just answer one question. At the end of Alan's show, he asked you if you had any last thoughts. You were saying, don't be afraid of shapes. How do you perceive people have been afraid, and have you gone through any of this yourself?
I personally don't, because I'm numerate. And to me, I'm numerate. I'm a numerate person, and I love numbers, and I love maths. So for me, maths and numbers and shapes have never been frightening, because I love them.
You did well in geometry.
Yeah. Now, languages I find terrifying. Foreign languages, because I'm absolutely hopeless at foreign languages. English I'm fine, but yeah, no.
English I'm fine.
But, and I love English, but foreign languages, I'm no good at them. But so many people I meet just look at the cover, open it, go, oh, maths, and shut it.
Yeah.
Because they've had such terrible experiences at school with maths. They struggled with it, or they didn't understand it. And And numbers are, you know, it's not like English or anything where you'll get extra help and it's recognised to be important because, oh, well, as long as you can count and add and do your change, it's fine. But also mathematics is taught in such a dry way. People aren't taught about the energy of the numbers and what 2 represents symbolically and what that means energetically. It's just about addition, multiplication, and it's all extremely logical. So generally women as a whole don't like maths. A lot of women don't like maths, you know, because it's not something they're necessarily drawn to. So
I think
that's what I say.
girls are supposed to be better at it than boys.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, they are initially, and that's what's so sad. They get put off because, as you say, women are have this more intuitive side. So I focus very much on, well, what do shapes mean? What do they actually mean, as opposed to the mathematics behind them and describing a temple and pointing out all the angles and the ratios and the pies.
Well, it's like the study of economics should really be the study of human happiness. Yeah. People think, oh, that doesn't seem right. It should be the study of, you know, resources and so on. But what are resources for?
Exactly.
And so if people have a lot of stuff but they're not enjoying it, then you've got a problem both for the haves and the have-nots, because the have-nots start to accumulate and they don't even know where to turn to not have society crumble. And you see a lot of philosophy starting to develop that the only way out is an Armageddon, and you've got to save your own skin and store up food and head for the hills. And that, to me, seems not very balanced.
No. So yes, so when I was saying don't be frightened, a lot of books on sacred geometry, because I don't actually have the word sacred geometry on the front there, because
no, you don't, but it's
because
nice.
Geometry is in everything. It's only sacred. So
you didn't want to turn people off with
exactly,
geometry?
because the word sacred geometry puts people off. The word geometry puts people off.
So some people don't like sacred.
Some people don't like geometry. So shapes.
Shapes, yeah.
Neutral. Circles, squares, triangles. They're nice, warm, fuzzy, friendly things. You use them every day. Sacred geometry is associated with very complicated books that involve a lot of mathematics.
Yeah.
This is more about the symbolism of shapes and what they mean and what they represent. That's what I say.
Geometry was so easy for me when I was in school. It was so fun. It just, but then I went to a girls' school too, so maybe
you're absolutely
if I was
true.
with men, maybe it wouldn't have been as nice.
Well, no, you're absolutely true. If people do like one area of maths, it'll usually be geometry, because it is. You can see, you can understand it a bit better as opposed to calculus or algebra or something like that, which is all about the number.
Right. Before we ran out of time, what's your experience in a crop circle? You've been in a crop circle?
No, I haven't, bizarrely.
You haven't?
But I know an awful lot of people linked into crop circles, and you can get into the energy of them just by looking at them, meditating on them.
So you don't have to actually.
You don't actually. Obviously, it's a more intense experience if you actually get into them. And I know crop circle followers, one woman in particular who lives in a tent, and that's all she does all summer, is follow the crop circles, and she's drawn up a map of them, which she shared with me. Unfortunately, she has no phone, she has no home, she has no email, so you can't, there's one address that if you write to her, you can sometimes get hold of her, but she's basically a nomad, if you like.
Really?
And our paths crossed one day, and she had this map, just with, she'd
She's
mapped
like a
them all
crazy
up.
saint, huh?
Yeah, and it was incredible because you can immediately see the patterns, the logics, and where they were forming. It was most amazing.
So it was a nice encounter.
In fact, unfortunately, she then scuttled off out the room, and I haven't been able to get hold of her since, because I thought that would need to get up. But obviously, I'll track her down again one day.
When you meditate, do you see yantras? Do you see shapes?
Yes, I always get shapes.
You always have.
I
all
always,
your life?
always,
have
always.
you been a meditator all your life?
No, definitely not.
No.
Oh, absolutely not.
But now you are?
No. Well, funnily enough, when I was doing art and things, I would have been doing it without realising it. Like when you go out into the zone if you're in a bath or walking around.
Right.
But actually practicing meditation, and this is again a key point. A lot of these things require practice and hard work to learn how to do them. Some people are lucky, like gifted musicians, where they just have it. Mm-hmm. But for most of us, it does require practice, and it took me years to get to grips with meditation.
What kept you going on? Because they don't give a degree in sacred geometry. What?
Sometimes I ask myself that actually, what
Really?
kept me going? Oh yeah, because if I'd known, I just got completely obsessed about it, and I knew it was important for me to do it. And it's not about making the money out of the book. I just know this is important knowledge that people need to know. Because as you say, once you understand it, and you understand the impact of it, And I do get people saying to me, oh, you shouldn't be telling people this is a secret. And I say, this isn't secret, it's in everything around us in nature. It's for people to recognise it and tune back into it again.
So your hard work unfolds a secret and makes it your knowledge.
Exactly.
Well, thank you, Karen. I've been talking to Karen French, and she has put out a book, Gateway to the Heavens, and I've really enjoyed going farther down the rabbit hole with you, and I look forward to more discussions, because I think it's a really worthwhile topic.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you.
Are we out 58 minutes? Oh, okay, great.
That's good. Did you talk about the picture?
Yeah.
This one, a bit. It's very interesting.
A little bit.
Because you could go into do a little bit about just the picture, the elements. How are you doing, Karen?
I'm okay. I'm alive still. I can feel my jet lag starting to kick in. Yeah, water would be good. Well, yeah, lovely.
No, we can do more on Thursday.
Thursday.
Because we've got a lot of nice time.
What water
I've
should
just
I
got
get for? 'Cause I know
my.
you have radioactive
Oh,
water
there's
too.
the water there.
This one?
Yeah.
I
What's your
am.
schedule for Thursday?
Thursday, I'm. Oh
don't
yes,
have
I'm going to
Thursday?
have to change.
You have a book signing on Thursday?
I've got my evening thing,
Oh, good,
which is
smart
at
you,
7,
Victoria. Smart
and
you.
I'm meant to be going out for lunch, but it's not firmed. I can change that to
Well,
tomorrow.
We can do it after your lunch.
Yeah?
You know, like around 3 o'clock.
That should be fine. Yeah.
Because it's a nice 3-camera
Thank you.
studio.
Whereabouts is it? Is it close by?
It's the
59th
cathedral.
Street. It's not far from where your hotel is.
Oh, that's good, because what I'd like to do is I'd like to go back and freshen up before I go to the east-west
Yes, you
thing.
should do that.
Yeah, just because I've got to get back into the zone then, because I'm in
Yeah.
public, in the public eye then, so I have to get my public persona.
There
Yeah.
should be some, I wonder if there,